All right, hi again. Today we're going to be talking about a developer's feature, and this is for those who write code and want to extend Howler. Today we're going to talk about the new 3D API, which is available and feature complete since build 107 of Howler 11, 11.2c, I believe. And as you can see here, we have a simple rendered scene. Contains the geometry in OBJ format. This was rendered in Howler. Really simple scene, but we're going to take a look at the feature in our API. This is the material file for the OBJ file, and this is let's see, some these are some of the geometries that we've included with the Howler installation. And this is the OBJ file itself. These are text files. They're standard file formats that most 3D programs can export. They can contain vertex and face information, and that's in the OBJ file. And each OBJ file usually contains a matching MTL file, which is a material file, which is a very simple format for storing surface information or texturing information such as image maps, coloring, and specular, that sort of thing. So we are able to parse these files with a few limitations, namely all objects should have only triangles, no quads or single point polygons or 2-point polygons. And that's the main limitation. A few others. If a object contains textures, the object should be completely UV mapped. If it doesn't contain textures, it doesn't have to have a UV map. But at this point, we don't support objects that have mixed UV maps. Some vertices with a UV and some vertices without a UV. So that's just a couple things to be aware of. We have inside the Howler folder a geometry folder, and that contains some test objects that you can work with, as well as a bunch of texture maps, so that have all been tested to work with Howler. So let's dive in and take a quick look at the API. Then later we can talk about some other things about it. I'm going to just use Visual Basic for now because I'm familiar with it, but this will work with any language that supports COM. That's the Component Object Model. It's a standard feature in Windows. It's an older feature, but it's still well supported. And let's just go ahead and make a reference to the Howler executable. And that will be, let's see, I have to make sure I'm using an exe. Okay. Just click. And there it is, Dog Waffle exe. And that gets a reference to it. Now we should be able to use the object browser. That's in Visual Basic. That's F2 or Shift or Function F2, depending on how you have your keyboard set up. You can see these are some of the things that are available to, let's see, to developers inside of Howler. There's quite a few features available. We're going to go to VB render, if I can find it. Let's see, there it is. And you can see this is the entire programming interface to working with 3D in Howler. Very simple to use. Just simply, it's a matter of loading objects, loading geometry, that is. With the load geometry command, it simply takes a file name and a string. This should be a relatively easy, just point to a OBJ file. And you don't have to worry about the material file. It sorts all that out by itself. Once you've loaded it, this returns a long. That long is an index. That's the index of the geometry. Say you loaded 3 pieces of geometry, then you'd have an index of 0, 1, and 2. Simple enough. Then when you render, you just you don't render the geometry itself. You render an instance of the geometry. So you can have a lot of different instances of a single geometry, all at different transformations. You just call this, you give it the index, which we just talked about, and then an XYZ value, a scale value, and a rotation value. And that's it. One thing I didn't mention yet is before rendering an instance, you just have to call begin render, and then when you finish rendering instances, you call end render, and that's it. I should mention that begin render has one parameter. You can safely ignore that. That's an hardware device context. If you don't use it, it will render directly into Howler, the image in Howler. No problems. A few things you might want to do is set a camera. There is only one camera, so you're not creating new cameras, but you're just changing the position of the camera. That's different than lights. With each light, you're adding a new light. So you can add like 100 lights if you want to, but it's really practically but to 1 or 2. 2 would be probably best. So you call light for each light you want to add. You give it a rotation, or sorry, you give it a position. There's no rotation. These are just point lights. And you also give it color attributes. And that's it. You set several lights. You set your camera where you want it. You can add fog if you want it. You give it a color and a level. That's the basically the distance at which point the fog, everything is enveloped in fog. And that's about it. Then you just end render, and it renders it. And that's really all there is to it. As I've said before, there are just a few limits on what type of geometry you can have in an OBJ file, such as having only triangles. And we do support one feature that's not standard in OBJ, and that's a clip map. We did that for supporting rendering trees, and let's take a quick look at that. In the MTL file, there is a thing here called map clip, and it's just like map transparency, very similar. You just give it the file name, and you probably not want to use a fully qualified file name because it will automatically look in the geometry folder, and so forth and so on. Okay, so that's a brief introduction. Not sure we really need to talk more about that because it's so simple. It should be pretty much self-explanatory. A few little things you might want to know about is once you've added a bunch of lights, you might get to a point where you want to move a light. Well, since you can't really move a light, what you can do is dispose the drawing. That clears out everything, and then start with all new lights. Basically, very simple. And I think that's really all I have to talk about. Thanks for watching. As I said, this is a developer feature, and if you are using Howler build 107, you will see, I believe, a small plugin that was written to render OBJ files. Let's take a look at that. Under Utilities, Widgets, and Render in OBJ. We'll go here. Find, let's see. I said we had a geometry folder with some geometry already in it. We'll hit. Okay, so it's a mushroom. We can move it around. There are 3 modes: wireframe, bounding box, and full render. So there you go. That is object rendering in Howler. Thanks for watching, and talk to you for now. Later. Talk to you later. Ta-ta for now.